Welcome back to Things You Don't Know, the podcast that digs up the buried bones of history and shines a light on the forgotten figures who shaped the world we live in. There are many aspects of the American Revolution which aren't as well known. Some of them we've covered. Dr. Deneen's amazing research in finding an American Revolutionary War hero in Cesar Drake is one shining example of that. Today, we're heading north, way north, to talk about a little known hero of the American Revolution. His name, Moses Hazen, and the surprising story of pro-American Nova Scotians. Yes, those who live in Nova Scotia, who risked everything for a new nation that many of them wouldn't even live to see.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. That's absolutely right. We tend to think of the revolution as strictly a 13 colony affair. Boston Tea Parties and massacres, Philadelphia Congresses, Virginia planters like George Washington turned generals. But the borders of that struggle weren't so clear. The differentiation between what we now call the US and Canada certainly wasn't so clear. And tucked away in the shadows is the story of a man born in Massachusetts, fighting in Canada, leading all types of refugees, and dreaming of a free republic.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. Moses Hazen was born in 1733 in Haverhill, Massachusetts, back when it was still a rough frontier town. He was of Jewish descent through his father, which makes him one of the very few Jewish officers in the Continental Army.
Yes, and may I also add, he was not only of descent, but practiced what would now be called Orthodox Judaism. But before the American Revolution even started, Hazen had made a name for himself. He fought in the Seven Years' War, what Americans call the French and Indian War, on the British side. That's where he got his military training, saw the horror of frontier warfare, and earned a reputation for being, let's just say, intense and very brave. Some called him the Moses of the Revolution, not just for his leadership, but because he would eventually lead a people out of exile. After the war, he settled in Saint Jean near Montreal in what was then Upper British Canada. But when the colonies rebelled, Hazen, despite his British military background, threw in his lot with the Patriots. That wasn't a small decision. It meant betraying his neighbors, former comrades, risking everything he owned. As I said before, our revolutionary struggle was as much a civil war as the great cataclysm of the 19th century. Dr. Holly Meyer details his and the struggles of pro American Canadians in her masterwork, Congress's Own.
Now, one of George Washington's boldest ideas in the early war was the invasion of Canada. The goal, well, bring the French-speaking Canadians into the fight. Hazen was instrumental in this effort. See, it was a great strategy because if you spread the British forces further, stretch their lines, kind of bolstering this idea, there was a large pro-American element in Nova Scotia. I really didn't know that until Dr. Deneen brought that to my attention. There was a so-called 14th colony. Take a look at a volume of our book, Things You Don't Know, for more details on pro-Americans in Canada. Those wishing to ally with the United States were nurtured by Moses Hazen and Charles Carroll. Now, who was Carroll? Well, he was an important Maryland politician and the only Catholic in the Continental Congress. So we have a Jew and a Catholic. And I don't know if that had any impact or effect on their decisions. I rather think it did. I think it's probably outside the scope of what we're trying to talk about today. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Deneen?
I would, although in very general terms, I would agree with you. One thing Hazen and Carroll had both done was help John Dickinson, yes, the John Dickinson of 1776, draft an appeal to our Canadian brethren in both the First and Second Continental Congress, encouraging them to join the fight and promising them their religious freedom.
Okay. So here's what happened. Moses Hazen took the lead advocating for military action in the so-called Battle of Valcour Island.
That's a very interesting battle. If you want to know more about that, watch the film Benedict Arnold, Man of Destiny. Hazen joined the American expedition to Quebec in 1775. That campaign was led by Benedict Arnold when he was very strong on the Patriot side and Richard Montgomery. The campaign was a complete disaster. Native Americans using guerrilla tactics won an overwhelming victory. Montgomery died in the snow. Arnold was severely wounded. The Americans were defeated. But Hazen, he stayed. He kept trying to rally support, and he paid a very high price. The British burned his home, confiscated his property, labeled him a traitor, even locked up his wife. But even with no home and no base, Hazen didn't give up. He went south, bringing with him a growing group of Nova Scotian and other Canadian refugees who had risked their lives to support the American cause. Now, it's very important to understand here, ladies and gentlemen, these weren't just pirates or adventurers. These were people who were outside the Anglican mainstream of British society. Many were Acadians, French Catholics, even other British Protestants, as well as a small number of freed African Americans serving as NCOs in the Army. They were also present because all of these men had grown very disillusioned with British rule. They believed in the American ideals, or at least in the promise of being governed more fairly.
This is where things get even more interesting. In 1776, Congress authorized Hazen to raise a regiment known formally as Congress's Own Regiment, but informally as the Canadian Regiment. That's right. It was a multicultural, multilingual unit. Acadians, Canadians, Englanders, Nova Scotians. It was like a mini republic in arms. Wow, that's a really interesting concept. And they fought everywhere. They weren't just guarding the border. They were in the thick of it. Brandywine, Germantown, Yorktown, Hazen's men were there. We don't hear about it, but they were there. They bled for a country that for many of them wasn't even theirs yet.
And Hazen was much more than a commander. He was a protector of these men, a kind of father figure. He made sure at a time when the Continental Army had very few supplies that his soldiers were fed, clothed, and paid. He sometimes even fronted money himself. He wrote dozens of letters to the Continental Congress pleading for support of his men. He also oversaw the construction of what was called the Bailey-Hazen Military Road. That was intended to facilitate another invasion of Canada that never came. That road would later help to link parts of Vermont, which was itself an independent country at that time, fighting with the U.S., to the rest of New England. Now let's turn to Hazen's people, those pro American Nova Scotians and Canadians, as we said. Nova Scotia is usually remembered as a Loyalist stronghold, and yes, many Loyalists did flee there after the war. See our Harry Washington podcast to learn about the positive fate of one of Washington's former slaves. But at the war's beginning, it was contested ground. There were underground Patriot cells in Halifax, smuggling routes, secret correspondences with New England. In fact, in 1776, there were serious rebellion rumors in Nova Scotia, plans to rise up and join the Americans. But with a large number of British, Hessian, and Loyalist troops and a powerful naval presence, it was just too risky. Still, dozens, perhaps even hundreds of Nova Scotians made their way south and joined Hazen's regiment. They gave up everything: property, family, safety. And what did they get? No land grants, no statues, not even citizenship until much later. Many of them died without ever seeing their dream of a united North American republic come true. But their sacrifice, friends, it mattered. Every musket at Yorktown, every scout in the woods, every letter Hazen sent to Congress, it all pushed the best part of the revolution forward.
You know, after the war, Hazen was a bitter man. And honestly, he had a right to be. Congress didn't reimburse him for his personal expenses. Huh. His land in Canada was gone. He was left impoverished. He spent years fighting for back pay and compensation. He even sued the government, and yet he never turned against the American cause. He believed in what they'd built, even when it cost him nearly everything. He died in 1803, relatively forgotten. No fanfare, no great tomb. But in his will, he mentioned his regiment, his men, and his dream.
Here's what gets me, friends. Hazen believed with all his heart that freedom should not be defined by borders. He believed in a transnational revolution, a republic that could stretch from Boston to Montreal to Halifax, welcoming anyone who would fight for liberty. So why don't we remember Hazen? Why don't we remember the Nova Scotians, the Quebecois, the Acadians, the Canadians who risked it all on our behalf? Because they were inconvenient. They complicate the clean lines of history to Star Wars approach, one group over here, another group over there. But that's what this entire podcast of Things You Don't Know is all about. So many messy truths and forgotten heroes.
You know, I'm so thankful for you, Dr. Tanine, because I know that many classic historians, people of your caliber of knowing and knowledge and the breadth of your knowledge, they wouldn't be able to accept this perspective. They just wouldn't, because as you point out so eloquently, it's messy. It's not clear. It's not storybook. This is reality, but they don't want to see it. And I thank you so much for that. It's just wonderful to work with you.
Well, it's my pleasure, Dr. Weaver. And if I could just very briefly, I became acquainted with this story as a young boy during the bicentennial. My late grandfather, Robert Leroux, was an artist and an amateur historian, and he found a book by a man called Alan Everest. It's called Moses Hazen and the Canadian Refugees in the Revolution. And I was 4 or 5 years old and just devoured that. It's it's an exciting, dynamic, multifaceted story.
And yet people don't recognize the amazing things that you bring to not only the story of history, but the real intricacies, and not in some dull memorize these names things. Yes, there are names. Yes, there are dates. But I so much appreciate the fact that that's not the whole story to you.
No, it really isn't. If it is, it's very dull, and no wonder young people get lost and say to themselves, "This happened 250 years ago. What the hell has it got to do with me?"
Well, and that is, to me, one of the reasons for this podcast.
I agree.
It is not to take just some dull thing from the past and look at it, da 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 da. No, I'm sorry. What it really is about is boots on the ground history. Boots on the ground history means looking at the past, yes, but how does it affect today? How will it affect things going forward? That's really our focus. Wouldn't you agree?
I could not agree more. You're quite right.
So, you know, the next time you think about the revolution, think beyond the 13 stripes. Think of Moses Hazen. Think of the frostbitten Nova Scotian volunteers. Think of a regiment without a country marching for a dream. And remember, sometimes the truest patriots are the ones who don't start with a flag, but who help create it.
Quite true.
And here's something that might surprise you. In 1779, Moses Hazen was pulled into a scandal involving none other than Benedict Arnold before his betrayal.
Oh, yeah. This is a story that'll make your jaw drop, friends. At that time, Arnold was serving as the military commander of Philadelphia, having been wounded at the Battle of Saratoga and almost lost his leg. And while he had fought bravely earlier in the war, his time in the city was, well, messy. Very lavish parties, questionable finances, and being married to a loyalist, and most damning of all, smuggling.
Yeah, Arnold was accused of allowing loyalist merchants to move goods in and out of the city if they paid him the right price. It wasn't just shady, it was treason adjacent. The Continental Congress was furious, and George Washington, he needed someone tough, someone incorruptible, someone who couldn't be bought. So who did he choose to lead the court martial of Benedict Arnold? Moses Hazen.
Washington respected Hazen's honesty, even if he sometimes thought him a bit harsh. Hazen was direct. He wasn't a political operator. He wasn't part of the inner circles of continental high society. He didn't have the right connections. He was a soldier, a refugee, a man who had lost everything to this war. So when Washington handed him the responsibility, he did it with full knowledge that Hazen wouldn't flinch. And Hazen didn't. He led the proceedings with a sense of moral clarity. According to letters, Hazen openly condemned Arnold's behavior despite the fact it was not actually illegal. He called it a betrayal of the spirit of the revolution. Though the court found Arnold guilty only on two minor charges, ordering that he be reprimanded, they didn't go far enough for Hazen. He saw rot creeping in, and it made him furious. And remember, this is before Arnold switched sides. So, in a way, Hazen smelled the smoke before the fire. He saw, having worked with him, that Arnold's loyalty was paper thin, that he had a massive ego, and Hazen wanted accountability. Washington later admitted that Hazen's instincts had been right all along.
Yeah, kind of a very sad chapter of things there, isn't it? Thankfully, Hazen did see and stood up. Anyone wanting to explore how Arnold's loyalty to the American cause unraveled and the pivotal role his wife Peggy played in that shift, should definitely listen to our Peggy Arnold episode. It's gripping. It's a layered story of romance, ambition, and quiet treason.
Exactly. The war wasn't just fought with muskets. It was fought in ballrooms, behind closed doors, and inside the hearts of people who loved their country, or at least thought they did. So let's remember this story, ladies and gentlemen. Remember it for what it tells us about the fact that the idea of liberty burned outside of the original borders of the United States. The people who make up our country weren't only farmers and shopkeepers on the East Coast. They were all manner, all races, religions, cultures working together towards a common goal. We've so whitewashed everything, we forget some of that. So it's nice to see something here that looks at a lesser known part of that story.
Absolutely. I hope you've enjoyed this dive into some lesser known things. And I hope that you will indeed remember Moses Hazen. But for now, we're going to stop and give you the opportunity to respond, to hopefully give us a like, hopefully to subscribe, and come back soon. Bye for now.
Goodbye, folks.